Hey everybody, Edo here, and in my last video I talked about 5 great game mechanics. And whenever you talk about game mechanics with designers or anybody, especially with League of Game Makers, right? Everyone in board games starts talking about mechanics versus theme. Do you start with theme? Do you start with mechanics? Which way do you go? Is there right? Is there wrong? Now, first off, I believe you can do anything in almost any way. Work to your strengths and go, and work out the rest later. But when I was starting out in my video game career, I had the opportunity when I was working at Mind Control Software to work with Marc LeBlanc. Marc LeBlanc is awesome designer, engineer extraordinaire who started at, well, I don't know if he started at, but was in the Looking Glass group in Massachusetts, and then met up with Andrew Leaker at Mind Control Software, and they started Oasis and a bunch of stuff there. But the other thing Marc's really famous for is Robin Hunicki and Rob Zubek wrote a research paper on MDA, which is Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. And it was really in relation to the video game industry, but I find that I often think about it in the board game space, and I think more people should. So what Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics was thinking about when you make games, you are typically dealing with rules or the mechanics, but the rules, the basic engineering that goes into the game, the systems that come out of that play together to create the dynamics, right? And then you have, for lack of a better word, the fun or the aesthetic. And so what they were trying to do, I would say, is boil down this sort of back end of game development for the front end experience, whereas as a designer, you're thinking about what mechanics you're using to create what sort of dynamics in the environment or in the game to then have a certain aesthetic, and the end user, the player, consumes it based on their aesthetic. And so I think that's a different term than we often use in board games around theme, like fantasy or I don't know, you can even sometimes think of themes as sometimes it's fantasy or sometimes it's take that or miniature games. I mean, people talk about theme in terms of genre, they talk about it in terms of subject matter. I mean, it's a mixed up word like all of these are, right? But as far as this is concerned, right, mechanics are the base building blocks of your experience. Dynamics are how those building blocks work together to create experience, to create a moments and drama and dynamics within the play, and the aesthetic is the type of fun or the experience a player walks away with. There's a list. Marc and everyone put together a list. It's not considered to be exhaustive, but it's solid, and I like to read it because sometimes I miss one. But you have sensation, fantasy, narrative, challenge, sometimes competition, fellowship, discovery, expression, and submission. And submission is sort of gaming as a pastime. In video games, you have more of that space to work in, but certainly those things still reside in board games. And so when thinking about board game design, I think it's super important as a designer to think about what you want the player to remember from the experience, what they walk away with. Where was it about drama and narrative, or was it about sensation? I mean, a lot of games that have moving parts and things that are going on are have that, even in a physical form, have that type of expression of the aesthetic. Cooperative games, fellowship between players, challenge, right? And so I think we need to apply that when we think about board games. And one of the things I wanted to do quickly is, I had that video on mechanics. I wanted to talk about sort of dynamics and what that might be, right? So I have 3 examples. So Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation. Stellar game, one of my favorites, just absolutely fantastic 2-player duel game. And in this 2-player duel game, what you're doing is it's like Stratego on this board. It's like a diagonal square board, right? So it's a square, but it's the one end's the Shire and the other end's Mordor, or whichever way you want to go. I think let's go. I mean, it faces the player, right? So we do it this way, and what you're doing is you have hidden information on the different characters, and Gimli and Frodo and all of them, and you're trying to get to the other side of the board. And pieces move, and you can move a piece, and you play cards when you're in a confrontation. And so it's sort of simple play, simple base mechanics. Some of the incredible dynamics that come out of it, though, are how those mechanics work together to create the unexpected. And I bring this up because it does something so few games do so well. All of the characters are based on the movie, right? And so you have things like Frodo, for example. Where is he? Frodo is a 1. Higher the better, right? He's weak, obviously. Oh, and if Frodo dies with the ring, the game's over, right? So the dark side's trying to get Frodo, and you're trying to get Frodo through. And as those pieces layer in, they have, Frodo's special ability is when attacked may retreat sideways. So what ends up happening is as Darkseid's trying to get in on Frodo, he keeps sliding and slipping away. And then say Sam, who's a 2, says with Frodo, Sam's strength is 5 and may replace Frodo in battle, because you can have 2 people in a square. And you end up as a player trying to keep them together in order to succeed. And these simple mechanics recreate the dynamics and the drama and the experience of the movies or of the books or whichever you prefer, right? But this is a Knizia game, by the way, and he manages to use those simple things to create this outcome from those from the dynamics of the mechanics mixing together and working together, and it's so evocative and stunning. It's incredible. So I think this game does a great job with using mechanics to create that dynamic. But this is also a place where some of the aesthetic things becomes a little bit challenging, and this is why in board games you start falling in on that theme. Well, what's the aesthetic here? Is it challenge? Is it competition between players? Is it trying to recreate or fall into the fantasy or the narrative of the story? I mean, you're not telling a narrative. And so it does get a little bit more difficult when you're not in a first-person shooter, or you're not in an art game, or you're not in some of those places where in a video game there's a lot more freedom in certain senses. Board games tend to be more directly constrained to the mechanics because the rules have to stand up unless it's a very free-form game. But thinking about what you want the player to walk away with, what sensations, what sort of emotional response, what types of fun are they having when they play, will really help drive the development. Another game that I wanted to bring up was Steampunk Rally. All these games are outstanding. Steampunk Rally is fantastic. It is a great game where you're in a race with other players, and you're trying to build these fantastic steampunk contraptions to move forward and avoid damage, and they're breaking. And the reason I wanted to talk about this game and bring it up is the dynamics. You have you draft some cards, and you're building your machine, and then you're using dice to fill it, and then sort of like an engine builder where dice beget dice beget dice. And the way they've set up, and Oren Bishop's set up the use of dice into machine parts, and then the way that they stagnate and then have to be removed with how you vent them, produces this interlocking system where you sort of move forward and then fall back and then move forward and then something damages. And if you've ever thought of or fantasized or considered what it would be like to be on this like metal weird contraption with all these pieces, and what it was like to be an inventor trying to do something with whatever you could as fast as you can, and you were in a race, like, it does it. It pulls those mechanics together, and the layering of the systems together just produces the feel of that fantasy, and it's incredible, and it's fun and competitive and all those other things. But really, again, the dynamics of those things working together. It's not. I've heard, maybe calling it mechanisms, but you have these core rules, these mechanics, the way things are. You hit the ball. There's a pitch, right? There's physics, but then you have situational. There's a guy on first and third, and pitcher's up, and he goes to steal second. There's this emergent experiences that come from how the mechanics layer on each other. And I think understanding the dynamics there and then how they apply to the fun somebody has is a very important thing to consider. The last game I wanted to mention was Dragon's Gold. Dragon's Gold is by Bruno Faidutti. Love this game. And in Dragon's Gold, you are all dragon hunters, and there's all sorts of dragons, and you're competing to kill it, and then you are all divvying up the hoard, what was left behind, or the treasure. And there's tons of games with, bidding and negotiation and all that stuff. The thing about this game that stood out to me and makes me think about it again and again is it has a timer. And the players have a minute to divvy up the treasure. But not only do they have a minute, but if they don't all agree, if every player doesn't agree with the split, like even a little bit, if everyone's not like, we agree, nobody gets anything. And it's a super aggressive mechanic, by the way. But it's so powerful, and it plays, or the two mechanics of how you are trying to divvy up the hoard, coupled with a timer, produce this rigor of debate and conversation, and people getting offended and deep-seated hatred forever, right? That pulls out of that. It just grabs people, and those dynamics draw out an experience and draw out the fun. So again, from my side, there's a whole conversation you can have along this trajectory of mechanics to fun that's different than theme versus mechanic. So just something to think about and consider. Actually, there was an interesting video by Extra Credits about this as well. I'll link it. It's a different angle, but still, like, how can you think about this? And he did it with, a bunch of animations and stuff, so it's super clear too. So anyway, thanks a lot. Bye.